for connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is the multi-sense human. We're all familiar with the five senses. However, up to 33 senses have been identified in human beings. So I think we get to talk today about extrasensory perception, these extra senses above and beyond our traditionally understood five. So this should be interesting, but before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, and bringing this brilliant light and a beam from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and gently, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now, in this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Good morning to everybody else who's joining us. It's great to have you here with us this morning. And today we're talking about the many senses or the multi-sensory human. And, you know, we talk about extrasensory perception as if it's means that we perceive things beyond the senses, but in fact, we just have senses that pick up on other input. And I thought the reason that this came to mind as a topic is that I've been, excuse me, I've been looking into slime mold. And if you haven't looked up or learned anything yet or discovered slime molds, you got to check them out because they are a one-celled creature, a unicellular creature that the cells can grow huge, and they demonstrate what we would call intelligence. And so, you know, I was thinking about what's intelligence, but they just have this one-celled body, and they are able to make decisions. Like all kinds of experiments have been done where where the scientists put some kind of food source in a maze and started the slime mold at a particular place in the maze, and the slime mold would solve the maze, find the quickest way, the quickest path to the food. And it would do that by exploring all these different avenues. Then when it would find the food, the other avenues would just retreat back, so that what remained was this very, very efficient pathway to the food. In fact, they've used this kind of experiment to look at transit patterns through cities, for instance, and the slime mold pretty much replicated the transit patterns that were like bus lines, train lines, etc. But it's really, really fascinating. So it got me to thinking about what's intelligence, which got me to thinking about what are senses. So I decided I've heard that obviously we know that we have more than five senses, but I wanted to sort of be able to quantify those or to define those, identify them. So I found a reference. There's I'm not saying this is the definitive reference by any means. It was sort of the first thing that came up when I did a search, but there's a site called Bodytomy. I don't know how they say it. Bodytomy. Good morning, Robin. Welcome. We're talking about the multisensory human and identifying additional senses that we have that are essentially giving us information that we then synthesize. Because we've talked about how a lot of our existence resides on an other than conscious plane where we really don't know what we know. Like, we're not consciously present to the information that we're receiving. And we often get a gut reaction to something, a gut response to something, and we don't know why, or we're having the feelings that we're feeling. And it occurred to me, well, we're probably sensing things in other ways that we might not be consciously aware of. So the basic human senses are the 5 senses that we're familiar with. So eyes, sight or visual perception, called ophthalmoception, from the eyes. Audioception, which is the ear, hearing or auditory sensations. So that in and of itself is a really interesting thing, because we have these very sensitive bones in our ears that vibrate, and we may have auditory sensations that are not related to what we would call sound. So that's an interesting thing in and of itself. Gustoception, which is taste, or the tongue, the sense of taste. Olfacoception, or olfacception, which is nose, olfactory, smelling. And tactioception is our sense of touch, or the sense of our skin. And so when we talk about our skin, we know also, what else do we sense with our skin? So we sense temperature, right? So lack or increase of heat is thermoception. And then we have proprioception, which is awareness of body parts without visual input. So when we have experiences of kind of touch, but we're not necessarily touching anything, so we're experiencing maybe a tingling in our legs, or a sensation in our fingers, or nerve sensations through our body. That takes us to the next one, which is nociception. I'm not sure of my pronunciation, which is whole body, where these sensations reside, which is sensations of pain in the body, and skin, body, organs, etc. And equilibrioception, which is a sense of balance determined by ear fluid. So we've probably all experienced times when we felt really dizzy, for example. So Robin says, would this be the ringing of your ears, nose warming, finger tingling, and chills? I'm thinking the ringing of your ears might be something, I don't know if that would be audio perception, or if it would be like the sensation, but I would think like nose warming, finger tingling, chills, things like that. It sounds like that would be the proprioception, or nociception might be a combination of the two. And then of course we have the kinesthetic sense, which is really interesting, which is a sense of acceleration. So for instance, when we're in a car, you can feel like this incredible sense of acceleration. I think That's really interesting. I wonder if we can experience that without actual physical movement. That's kind of an interesting thought, right? Um, and then tactility is the perception of pressure. So, all of this is so fascinating to me because we can recognize that the mind doesn't make a distinction between something that is, in a big air quotes, real versus something that's vividly imagined or remembered. And so when people talk about I experience a pressure on my body, when we're visualizing something, we can we might be experiencing pressure. There's no physicality, external physicality to it, but we experience it. So that's a very interesting thing, experience of pressure. And then there's chemoreception, which is blood and brain, the sensations of hunger, thirst, vomiting, suffocation. That's another additional category of senses. Stretch reception, like muscles, joints, and skin, sense of gag reflex, gas distension, excretion. So stretch reception, that's a really interesting thing, like where there's these different experiences of movement sort of within our bodies. Cutaneous reception, sense of skin vasodilation. So this goes to your question or thought, Robin, because it has to do with like flushing. When there's dilation of blood vessels, for instance, that there's that cutaneous skin type perception. And synesthesia, this is something that I love. I don't understand particularly their example, which is combination of senses, like smiling at someone's voice, or maybe feeling a certain emotion when you hear someone's voice. So what synesthesia is the mingling of two sensations. And so, for instance, the examples that I'm most familiar with around synesthesia are, for instance, seeing sounds, where you might see music, for instance, or you might taste color, so this is a blending of two senses that you wouldn't normally associate with each other. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. And then it talks about extrasensory perception, and there's a whole bunch of those too. So when we talk about sixth sense, and I didn't have these distinctions previously, so I thought maybe you'd be interested in them too. So sense of intuition or a gut feeling is, they're calling it small brain, sixth sense. So my guess is that the sixth sense is maybe kind of an interpretation, or resulting from an interpretation of all these other inputs that we don't recognize. I think that I didn't see anything here about, at least yet, about, now I just lost what I was going to say, because my phone just rang and it distracted me, and now I lost it. So Rosalind says, how about pressure on the eyes? Still sleepy. So that feeling of pressure, that's proprioception, I guess. Anyway, the sense of intuition and the gut feeling is in my thought perhaps a response to an other than conscious processing. Now I remember what I was going to say. I would imagine that we sense electromagnetic fields as well. And I don't know that that's listed here, but we experience shifts in air pressure. We probably, I don't know how we wouldn't be sensing shifts in the electromagnetic field. And maybe that's how we get a lot of information from others, when we're in proximity to others, when we talk about picking up on someone's energy, maybe that's electromagnetic. Good morning, Isabel. Welcome. We're talking about the multisensory human and the many additional senses that we have. People have tracked up to 33, I think, different senses. Anyway, so we were talking about the extrasensory perception. Premonition is a subconscious sense of future events. And they're putting these next ones, including that, in the paranormal category. And so then telepathy is auditory perception of a person's near or far thoughts. So I didn't really have these distinctions. There's premonition is sense of future events. Telepathy is auditory. I didn't know that. Perception of future events. Clairvoyance is visual perception of invisible objects or events. So, and clairaudience is auditory perception of the invisible. I'm looking to see if there are more of them listed here. I think that was it in this particular list, but how cool is that? Okay, so here, this is interesting. On the other side of the coin, let me see if I can find this. To your question, Rosalind, this is interesting. The 5 senses we have in this other article, it says some sensations are not exclusively due to touching, tasting, hearing, seeing, or smelling. For example, feeling sleepy or short of breath. So the answer that this person was coming up with, saying, well, then I think there have to be more than 5 senses. And I'm just looking here to see what it says. Let's see. Anyway, I think this gets into a whole big conversation of chemical sensations. So I don't know about you. There are many senses or sensations. When we think about senses, sensation is what? It's the experience of sensory information, I imagine. Let's look that up too. Why not? We're really nerding out today. But I think this is interesting because it allows us to more fully perhaps bring to awareness what we're actually sensing, and to recognize the validation of it. So so sensation, it's interesting here that they call it a mental condition or physical feeling resulting from stimulation of a sense organ or from internal bodily change, such as cold or pain. And then another sensation, a general feeling not directly attributable to any given stimulus, as discomfort, anxiety, or doubt. A mental feeling, especially a state of excited feeling, sensation. So when we talk about senses, I think it's interesting, we talk about good sense, making sense of things. What are we talking about? We're talking about trying to glean information. So our senses are vehicles through which we are able to perhaps receive and interpret information. So even taste is broken into different categories, right? We have different portions of our tongue that taste different tastes, right? And so I wonder if each of those might be different senses. You know, we smell things and taste them often at the same time. My understanding is that if we don't smell things, we don't taste them. So, you know, maybe those two senses work in a synesthesia, you know, work together to create an experience. So, you know, I just find this stuff endlessly fascinating. How are we experiencing our world? Like what is the vehicle of experience for our world and our interpretation of what's real and who we are, how we operate. I think when we start looking at things a little bit more deeply, it's just endlessly fascinating to try to understand how we know what we know or what kind of input we have. Um, so for instance, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, and I don't know what category this falls into, but where somebody can walk into a crowded room, not just an empty, silent type room, but where somebody can walk into a crowded room and you can feel them. You can feel somebody just showing up in this room. So what's that? What is going on there? How are we sensing that? You might also have experienced where you can just feel uncomfortable. You turn around and there's somebody looking at you and you can feel them looking at you. What is that? What sense might that be? So I don't think it fit into the categories of something unseen or unheard. So Rosalind says, tasting parts of our tongue experience sweet, sour, bitter, and or acidity. And I think umami is another one. And so are each of those experiences, thank you for delineating that, Rosalind, are those different experiences, different senses? Or is it all taste? I mean, we put all those senses under the umbrella of taste, but they're different experiences, right? There's nuance to those experiences. It's kind of makes me think of and I don't know if it's really true, but I've always heard that, for instance, Eskimos have hundreds of names for snow because they make nuanced distinctions between different kinds of snowfall that those of us not living in that kind of environment don't even perceive. So when we make these distinctions, we open the opportunity to greater experience, right? So if we just sometimes if we've been sick or whatever, we can say, oh, my sense of smell is off, my sense of taste is off. Well, it may be that just my ability to taste sweet or distinguish sweet is off, you know, so that maybe that we could look at as a sense in and of itself. So the thing that we think of with the standard five senses is that our sensory experience is physical. So what happens, what's actually going on when we have precognitive type experiences or clairvoyant experiences, what's receiving that information? You know, is there a physical mechanism for the experience of that awareness that we just haven't encountered yet, or we haven't defined yet? You know, it's interesting when something can happen and like you get goosebumps. all over, that's a sense. But it could be that it's not happening from a local physical um, a local physical stimulus, right? Anyway, lots of fun to be thinking about all this stuff and to be recognizing that we are a vaster, much more vast collection of sensory interpretation than we commonly recognize. And I think as we start putting more attention to all the different ways that we receive information, or that we collate information, or we collect information, that we can broaden and enrich our own experience. So anyway, that's the thought. And as always, I'm so grateful to spend this time with you and appreciate your engagement with this. Rosalind says, my internal ear flutters sometimes. I'm looking for a link to when that happens. That's a great thing to notice. You're welcome. Rosalind says, interesting topic today. Thank you. I thought it was interesting too. You know, I'm fascinated when we start asking questions about the things that we typically don't ask questions about. It opens up all kinds of worlds for possibility that were previously unavailable to us because we didn't even think to look there, right? So anyway, it's so much fun, and much appreciation to you. So I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. And I invite you to check out all the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN One with the Earth, Enlightened World Living, and so much love and appreciation. I hope I get to see you again here really, really soon. Until next time.